Oh, oh. Take it away.
Bob, it's your turn. Stand up, microphone.
I'm going to steal the mic real quick from Bob. And I'll just take a couple minutes to introduce myself. My name is Keiko Mercado. I'm a planner with the planning department. I'm a long-range planner. And I work with the Puna CDP Action Committee. And so one of the things that you'll learn about me is that everything I do is intentional. And so you're not just looking at a pretty a'ali'i lei. The a'ali'i, like us, so one more thing, sorry. I am born and raised in Puna. My husband is born and raised in Puna, and we currently reside in Puna, and we raise our son there. So this is very near and dear to me. And so, like you look around, we have very different faces. We are very well blended. And so like a'ali'i, like the people who are here, it grows in many different climates. It grows mauka, it grows makai, it grows in a desert, it grows in a forest, and it's very strong, and it can resist strong winds and turmoil. And so, and every seed or every pod of the a'ali'i looks different. There's different colors, there's different shapes, there's different sizes. So just like us, we do that. And a'ali'i, which is what we're moving on to now, is very resilient, just like we are. And so I put that up there to honor our resiliency as we move forward. And so real quick, I will just go through most of these slides you folks have seen already at the past couple action committee meetings. So we've talked about we've talked about the 6 recovery support functions. Let's see if so health and social services, housing, economic development, natural and cultural resources, infrastructure, and community planning. And so we've also talked about how the different themes or sections of the CDP are in alignment with these recovery themes. And so then we've talked about our different opportunities and how to pursue and move forward with these. And you've seen this slide numerous times too, the role of the action committee and what the action committee is being tasked with and asked to do. And so at this point, I'm going to ask Bob Agris to come up. And we've been talking with action committee members, either one-on-one or in groups. We've also met with other community members. We've met with some cultural practitioners. We've met with your council electees. We've, we've been talking to Chok people. So I'm going to let Bob come up here and share about what we were talking about.
Great. Hey, now tell him I cried, eh?
We're not going. Hello. So what we want to do tonight is 2 primary things. We talked to all of you, and we wanted to just highlight some of the things that we heard from you, and then show you the recovery process that we hope is reflective of the kinds of suggestions that you made to us, and hopefully we'll get some feedback from you. But hopefully you'll see at least the game plan that we're putting forward so that we can figure out how we can work with you to make this all come together for the community. I think the key things, if you go back to this role part here, is especially when there's an update or like when you have changing conditions like the eruption, the role that the committee can play, especially in the recovery process in general terms, is this idea of advice on a process, helping to be part of or to lead or to support the engagement process with the community, and then to make some recommendations moving forward. In regards to what we heard from you, obviously what you said in terms of the role of the committee in terms of the recovery is to continue the work that you've been doing to champion actions in terms of implementation of the CDP, and in this case then, especially those issues that will help in the recovery. And many of you said the recovery is not just how do we get things back to where they were. This is an opportunity to really do some, to get us to resilience, but to do things that have not been done before, but in sort of within the vision that the community has already articulated through the CDP process. The other thing that you said was, as is your role, that you wanted to help in bringing the community together, to convene. You know the different communities, you know the people, so you want to play some part in that kind of process. And then the other is you had lots of ideas of how the committee could also help in sharing information, timely, accurate, up-to-date information through the process. So these are just all highlights. So again, we'll get an actual report that will summarize what we heard from you, put it together in terms of what implications there are moving forward. But I'm just highlighting some of the key areas. In terms of community engagement, one of the things that you talked about was trying to meet people where they're at, and you were talking about that in many different ways. One was, how does the process help the county to walk in people's shoes, to understand where they're coming from, what their experience is. But it was also this idea of also going to people, where they're at, where they live, where they work, where they play, where they pray, right? And not have to tell people, you gotta come here in order to actually be part of the process. The other thing you said, which was critical, was to use a range of engagement methods. Right, so community meetings have been powerful in some ways, but also if that's the only method, then you just have sort of the same kind of conversation. So, and part of the reason why you wanted us to use different methods was many of you said there are a lot of people who are not being heard, right? And we need to figure out how to lift up their voices in this recovery process. So that was sort of behind all of that conversation that you had in regards to that. And again, the timely, up-to-date, and accurate sharing of information was important. The other thing that you shared was there were a couple of things that you said needed immediate action, and so we've been trying to push on some of that, and the county has been working on a few of those. But these were some of the other hot button issues that was coming up. And again, this is only 3. There were like lots of other things that we'll compile and share back to you. But I do want to point out one thing in regards to this. This is sort of the power of listening and getting stories from people, because the issues are similar to all the issues we've been hearing across the communities, access, mobility, the roads, all those kinds of things. But the way you told the stories was that it's not just a story about people are not able to get to their homes, or mobility and bus service is really important. You told those stories within the context of there are many families already hurting, we're already hurting, and with the eruption, they are hurting even more in these hard economic times. So that's sort of a different way to think about these issues of access and bus service and the like. It's not just getting that done, but trying to make sure that the people who are actually hurting truly benefit with the actions that we're coming up with. The other thing that we heard that wasn't as loud when we gone to community meetings was the issue of youth and young adults and their future. There were lots of stories about how depressing it is to hear young people say, if we want a better life, the only way to do that is to leave our communities. And so you were talking about how do we think about the recovery from the standpoint of how do we create entrepreneurial and employment opportunities with the kinds of unique things that only this place has. And you even identify things that the eruption brought to this community that actually could be turned into opportunities that make sense for young people, but also done in a way that makes sense for the communities here. So just a couple of highlights that way in regards to the talk story that we had with you. So given all of that, what we tried to do, and sorry for, oh, sorry. So before I get to that, we talked to you about the community engagement, and we just wanted to remind you why engagement is important to this recovery process. Right, the first is people in community have local wisdom and local knowledge, right, that know how best to solve lots of problems, right? And so we need to bring that into the conversation in order to come up with viable solutions and sustainable solutions, right? The other is that engagement, especially working side by side with the county, builds both the communities and counties' capacity to problem solve together in collaboration and in partnership. And so that kind of engagement process is what we're looking for, right? We learn from you and truly understand and try to figure out how to walk in the shoes of the people in the community so we can figure out what kinds of policies and actions make most sense and then bring that back to you. But also in the same time, the community gets to understand sort of the limitations and the parameters and the resource issues that the county needs to wrestle with in order to come up with viable solutions. And given those understandings from both sides, we then work together in a collaborative way. The other thing that community engagement does is it allows many different perspectives to be embraced while still seeking common ground, right? So we know that we come, as Keiko just said, we are all those that, I'm sorry, what kind of flower was that? A'ali, right? We embrace that diversity, right? But at the same time, we try to make sure we get to some common ground so we can move forward. The criteria for good community engagement is we have to have critical mass. So it cannot just be the voices of a few that are talking loudly, right? It has to be many, many, many voices sharing what they believe. We have to involve a diverse group of people, and that's why you said try to lift up those voices that are not being heard. We have to nurture educated input, right? Not just what you think, but here's some information, we understand the situation, then now what you think. And it has to be quantifiable. So while we're talking about gathering many stories from people, this is not just to talk story. This is actually to understand in a deep way and to be able to get to quantifiable things and to have metrics to actually track things. We put this little example on the side here. This is a community engagement process that the city of Austin used in the transportation planning process. And this is one of these interactive things that helped with educated input, right? So they had 3 scenarios, they had goals. And when you press the goals and how you prioritize it, it'll then show you which scenario, how the scenarios play against your choice of prioritization of goals. Okay? So it's that kind of interactive process where people can better understand the trade-offs related to their choices that we're hoping for. So here comes this thing. So you have a copy of it so that you don't ruin your eyesight. But let me just point out a couple of quick things as an overview, and then we'll go through the, each of the phases. So first of all, the process is in 3 phases. The first is around prioritizing our goals, and we're not starting from scratch here. When we say prioritize our goals, these are the goals that you've already identified in the Puna CDP and in the general plan, right? But what we want to understand during this phase is what has happened to us during this eruption, what has changed, if anything, and how does that affect that? So that's what that part of the process is. And once we understand that, then we try to learn about our opportunities, needs to recover and to get to resilience. Then we vet our scenarios, and then we have an action framework to implement. One thing that you said loud and clear is we don't want to go to a process and wait before we do any action. So the way this is also designed is as we engage in community and with you, near-term, short-term issues and actions will be identified, and we will do our best at the county side to figure out how we actually, for those things that can be taken action on, that we take action on it with the community, right? So what goes through this process is identifying those issues that need that very thoughtful, deliberate kind of conversation and research and understanding so that we can get to prudent decisions about actions and policies moving forward. But for those things that we can quickly act on, we'll do that throughout the process and try to move them forward, okay? The other thing I wanted to point out here is that the process is organized around the recovery support function areas. So this is FEMA's framework, health and social services, housing, economic, natural and cultural resources, and infrastructure systems. There's one more, which is sort of an underpinning of all of this, which is community planning and community capacity building, right? And then here's an articulation of at least the intended outcomes in those areas moving forward. So hopefully that's what the recovery process is moving towards. Yes, Susie?
I just had a question because I know this is great work, and obviously the county has their purview of Kuleana, and then the state is not necessarily the same, like Department of Transportation or public schools is a state function. So as you frame this around the CDP, it's the CDP more articulates the county issues, right? And so how does that interface? I mean, I see some Department of Transportation, but, and I mean, I know you know where I'm coming from, that we had a loss of a public school, which isn't sort of articulated here, and I know it's not the Kuleana of the county in any way, although I have to say the county's been the greatest and only here. But
So we'll go through each of those sections, but the key thing that you're talking about is everybody understanding their roles, right? So some of the kinds of strategies will be policy changes, some of it will be capital improvement project priorities. This is a county kind of thing, right? But there will be lots of actions that only the community can take because they have access to resources that the county doesn't have, right? And then there are things that we need to advocate together, community and county, to get state and federal support and actions and policies changed. So we have to be mindful of that, those different roles as we come up with strategies, right? Because it's going to take all of us, as we all know, right? Okay, so let's go through, we're going to go through phase one. So this is the first part of it, right? Prioritizing our goals. And as you're going to see, each of the phases has this near-term action thing, right? So we're going to have a process where we're going to engage people to ask these questions. This is sort of the large question. What changes and impacts from the Kilauea eruption have you seen and or experienced that affect the Puna CDP goals, right? And how do we heal as a community? So this is gathering stories in small groups, right? Many kinds of different groups, and there's going to be a process where you can convene groups, others can convene small groups. We will come to you and support so that we can get those stories. And those stories will pull the information and data out of it and then begin to cluster and identify what exactly are the themes and issues so we can bring that back to the community. It's the same process that was used for the Ka'u Community Development Plan and the Hamakua Community Development Plan. So on the face, it looks like you're just talking story. In the back, there's, unfortunately, Keiko and Eric, who then have to take all, well, no, there's going to be a whole team that will take all of that information, put it through a matrix, a database, so it can be filtered through, and then all of that brought together so we can actually bring that back to the community, right? What we thought was a priority before maybe is not as much of a priority now because of Eruption. So that's what this part of the process is. And at the end of that process, you make recommendations of how those goals should be prioritized so that we can actually then go to the next phase of actually doing some homework and vetting what kinds of opportunities, needs, and strategies might help to address those goals. Okay, so that's the first phase, and the hope is that the timing of all of this is like probably through January, February. So until the first quarter, we'll be listening and trying to get community input that way. So then the next phase is what would normally be called a SWOT, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But this is actually more a process of co-learning, right? Once the community is like, you have recommended the prioritization of goals, then what does that mean for us? So we have to go do homework, right? We have to go find the data and information that goes behind those stories that we're hearing from people. We're gonna dig up examples from here, what's worked before and what hasn't, story examples from elsewhere, bring all that together so that we can all learn about how do we get to the root causes of those kinds of things that we're so concerned about and that we need to push on during the recovery process. And the key questions in each of those recovery support function areas around health and social services, what are our outstanding household needs, so sort of the micro level, and community-wide impacts, so kind of the macro level. For housing, what are our permanent housing needs and options? For economic, what and where are economic opportunities by sector? What's appropriate for our community and INA? For our cultural and natural resources, how do we protect and preserve our natural and cultural resources? For infrastructure systems, what are our risks and fiscal impacts? What infrastructure do we need to support our recovery efforts? And so some of that research that I'm talking about, so the county is already working on a range of different kinds of planning processes that you already had talked about. So a multi-hazard mitigation plan, an economic recovery plan by doing a redevelopment feasibility assessment to look at sort of the economic impacts. So out of those will come information, outstanding housing needs count, volcanic risk assessment, an economic impact assessment, a fiscal impact assessment. This is information that the community will have access to so that it can understand what's actually going on and why they're experiencing what they're experiencing, right? So that we can then figure out what needs to be done moving forward. So this part of the process is we're gonna look very carefully at things, right? And so do we understand our recovery opportunities and needs? So we want to wrestle with these things that we're feeling, but understand why it's happening so that we can then figure out what's the best way to address them. And so we'll be looking at all this information that comes out of these various planning efforts that are going to be ongoing so that we can get to the point where you as the action committee can identify and recommend prioritization of objectives. And then those objectives will be used by the mayor, the civil defense administrator, recovery manager, and the planning director to begin to identify what kinds of strategies might be helpful moving forward. And then the last phase is to actually identify more specifically, given our different roles, as we talked about, Susie, what are those strategies that make sense for us, but then to begin to vet that. When we say vet, again, it's an understanding. When we make choices, there are trade-offs, right? So we need to understand all of that before we actually get to actions. And this is why what we hope to have in this section are these interactive scenario planning activities. Somebody else is going to talk about that later this evening. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to talk about it because he texted and was sick, but I'll come back to that later. But it's important that we don't just talk, right? The idea of the interactive kinds of scenario planning activities or even the gamification of some of those things allows us to think about these issues in ways that we may never have thought about it, right? Because now we see all these different things laid out in front, and when we make choices, oh, I want this, but it's going to end up being this way, and I don't want that. So then how do we be creative and figure out something else, right? So that's what this process is. Again, as Suzy was pointing out, we have different roles to play. This is county policy changes and capital improvement priorities, right? But there are actions that the community can take, and then we all have to work together to help advocate for things at the state and federal level that needs changes. And once we get through this process, there are multiple mechanisms to which implementation can happen, right? So there's the general plan update and how that's going to be affect some of the actions. There'll be CDP implementation, which you're already involved in. There's a multi-hazard mitigation plan update, which will also have some implementation aspects. And then obviously the kinds of things that the community itself is going to pick up and say, we can do this, we're going to move forward, no matter what. And then, so this is what we end up with. Again, this is a framework. It's more of a guide for recovery moving forward. And it's to get to not just recovery, but this thing that we've been talking about, which is resilience, right? And trying to understand that for all of the different recovery support functional areas.
It was interesting because we had a discussion earlier, and Larry was saying that it's not necessarily our role to be so heavily involved in the recovery effort, but are we to take from this that we are the main vehicle that you guys are going to use? I mean, just not casting any aspersions, just wondering, is that the focus moving forward?
I guess the way I would address it, and maybe Ron and Diana are also here, so they may have, I think they're here. Somewhere out there.
They ran away.
They are. But as you can see, how do you say, the recovery process has many faces, right? It's a multi-hazard mitigation plan. There's climate change planning that's going on also with its assessment of the risk.
So there will be like different agencies doing other processes on those pieces.
And so your role is you're talking about recovery as it relates to the Puna CDP and what does that mean for implementation of the CDP moving forward. So you might have had ideas of how the priorities of how you wanted to implement the CDP based on what you were hearing from the community. Something's happened in the last 6 months. So what does that look like, right? And relative to recovery then, you as the committee for implementing the Puna CDP, how does it affect what you folks want to do? Anything else in regards to that?
Looking to them in their role as defined in Chapter 16 to provide specific advice, recommendations, to inform the process. So there's the key decision points, right? We'll specifically look to the action committee for a recommendation.
So I guess that was part of our discussion earlier, like when you're talking about how, I mean, it's awesome that we're planning all this community engagement, and I totally support the approach. Just curious what other community engagement efforts there will be, or will this be the main vehicle for that? I think that'll help us shape the decisions we need to make.
So the community engagement process is relative to recovery in general.
Right.
Right. But you will be getting that information so you can understand how it affects the Puna CDP implementation. But that would also inform how we move forward with maybe some broader recovery efforts also.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Yes, sir.
This is a question you probably can't answer, but what is the anticipated timeline of this process? And the reason I ask that, let me put it in context. The Puna CDP was started in 2005, 3 years in process. It reached the County Council for adoption in 2008. One of the cornerstone activities in that plan was to do a whole village master plan. We're on the verge of 2019. That's never been done. The general plan was due to be updated 2015. The work was started, and they were already presenting, reviewing what they had come up with by the end of 2016. But here we are again on the brink of 2019, no general plan update. And I'm just concerned with these types of processes that extend for so long that they lose the momentum that was intended. And I just bring that up. I'm not pointing fingers. I just, how do we condense this into an action that's going to take place in a short time? Because Puna is suffering now more than it ever has, and it's never been. Our economy here in Puna has always been struggling, but it's really struggling now, and people are hurting. So, how long a process are we looking at, if you have any idea?
The intention is that the 3 phases of this will be piled like next year, right? So, you'll start seeing scenarios and probably ways to start acting on it, hopefully by the middle of next year, or so like 3rd quarter kind of thing, 4th quarter. Okay, so that's the first part. That's the timeline that we're going to try to push on because of the urgency of the recovery effort. The other thing that I want to point out, because it's already happening, right, is that as we talk to different people, already they've identified a number of issues that can be acted on. And that's what this process is. So what that looks like is these kinds of near-term things. There's the county has a recovery team that has key people from all of the key departments that sit there and try to wrestle through how do we push on some of these things that need to happen now, right? So the hope is that we will be, that we can actually take action and actually tell you about what's happening. That's been a little bit harder, the communication. So part of this process to improve the communication with the community so that you know what has actually been acted upon, right? And so we're trying to improve on that also. So that kind of thing is like a now thing, and hopefully you'll see if we're working together on this, that things are actually going to be happening, and you're not going to have to wait all the way until here. These kinds of things that have to be vetted are the ones that we know that if we take action quickly, there might be unintended consequences kind of stuff. So we we got to think this through. Let's talk. Let's go do research. We have to pull those things out. But the other ones, let's just get things done. Let's take care of stuff because, just as you say, people are hurting, our communities are hurting as a result of this. So that's what the overall process is, and we're trying to prepare ourselves internally so that we actually have the capacity to do that. We can't say that we're there yet, but we're trying to organize that.
I want to acknowledge the incredible work that Diane and all the team in the county put forward with really trying to mobilize an action plan in recovery, and then the state, for whatever, felt the reason not to have a special session, no funding, all the county proposal funding was shut down. So this takes time, energy, life force. A lot of time has gone by, and there has not been a lot of action. So how, through this process, is the state being engaged? Because that was one of the issues. The state didn't feel like they were invited at the table. And so that we actually can be successful in manifesting what our needs are. Because this has really sort of been a kill spirit, not from the county, but from the state perspective.
Well, thank you, Susie. And thank you all for your patience and perseverance and really your strength. It's amazing. So what can I say? I'll just give you a quick history. When the eruption occurred, a lot of people came forward and said, tell us what you need. Tell us what you need. Be big, be bold. And so the county kind of took it to heart in the recovery team, and we said, okay, we will be. And so you saw those numbers in the newspaper, jump, jump, jump. Because as we move forward, we identified more needs, more opportunities that would help build a stronger, more resilient community. So that didn't mean that we were asking the state for every dollar, but that didn't get communicated well. Bob talked about our ability to communicate. You know, we all have day jobs, just like you all do, or you have night jobs, and some of our day jobs fill into night. And then we have, you know, response and recovery efforts that have to go forward. So we didn't do a good job in maybe defining that clearly for the public, and we tried to do that with our legislators. But we kept persevering, and again, you know, as we've refined this message, you know, we know that the county has capacity only to cover a smaller portion of what we see as the potential for rebuilding and creating resiliency. The state has another chunk to do. And yes, they did not step forward with a special session. There are things that they had to weigh with that. And, you know, timing is always important. So the next legislative session is coming up. We're working now with our elected officials and the governor's office to move that forward. We're also working actively with our congressional offices and federal agencies to identify how can the federal government bring the lion's share forward. And so those mechanisms are moving. Some disaster relief bills have been passed by Congress, and now the sorting goes on. You know, there's been a number of disasters throughout our nation in this past year, and so, you know, they've got to sort through that, you know, where the priorities are and where the needs are the highest. And so we're trying to continue to give them data. We're trying to sort data that the community-based nonprofits have collected and FEMA has collected on housing needs, sort those pieces out, give them accurate numbers. So we're continuing to work on that. So I guess, where are we at now? It's a good question. We're going to continue to move forward. You know, I think if there are folks in the community that can step forward and talk to, you know, our legislators, again, you know, that's during the session, before the session, reach out, you know, and it's not just about, you know, our local representatives, but we need to convince folks on Oahu how important this is to the resiliency of our community. We need help, and we're not looking for a handout. We're looking to how we can help to rebuild this community and strengthen it for the future. So we want to do the right things, and so let's just imua and go forward. I appreciate everybody's help on all of this.
What disaster bills have been passed that can aid Puna on the federal level?
$1.6 billion appropriation made, and again, that those funds, I believe, the majority of them, if not all, I'm looking at Ron, go to the housing and urban development.
Yeah, that's all a CDP appropriation. It's 1.68 billion.
1.68 billion. Okay, so those funds are out there, but again, we've had wildfires in California, we've had hurricanes in Florida, you know, I believe North Carolina was impacted this year, so, you know, so it's going to be sorted out. There may be additional moves to appropriate funds again, and, you know, again, we're going to continue to work with our legislators. Those are special funds for disaster relief, but there's also existing programs that we can continue to tap into as we move forward. So we're searching hard. We've got our folks with FEMA have been very helpful to us. They've got planners in the state that they brought in specifically to help us work through the various programs. All of the federal programs have been stepping up, whether it's USDA, HUD programs. I'm drawing a blank here. Anyway, they're out there and they're working hard for us. So it takes time. Some of it's a function of knowing exactly what we need to do. Some of it is, having the money align. Some of it's matching dollars. So.
Has FEMA basically given money for infrastructure? Is there money that's been divvied out yet?
Okay, so FEMA has given the county, has given the community resources. Individuals have applied for assistance and received that. Now, whether that's you've lost your home and you received a check, or whether you're receiving rental assistance, there's a variety of services that have been made available. For the county, I don't know the details on the financial side, but there are cost sharing, substantial cost sharing on the part of the federal government to help with the response expenses that we've incurred to date, and then identification of infrastructure that, as we move forward, will be matched.
Okay, because let me just tell you a little bit about our story. I'm in volcano earthquake damage. We had someone come out to our house that didn't have any idea of structural building. Then FEMA said, oh, we made a mistake, we're going to send someone else. That person never showed up. Now I'm in an appeal stage. And so it sounds to FEMA's got its problems. And meanwhile, we have to, go through an appeal. I'm not talking just myself. I've talked to various people up at Volcano too, for Upper Puna. I don't know about Mountain View, Curtistown, and places like that, but I know that that's a problem. Some people haven't gotten roofs up yet. We are not without our problems up in Volcano due to the over 13,000 earthquakes.
Okay, I'm a resident of Volcano also, so I hear you. I encourage anyone in the community that doesn't feel like FEMA has addressed their needs, go back and revisit with them. They are in town, they are available. There'll actually be FEMA representatives this Saturday from 9 o'clock to 2 at KL High School. We're having a housing fair, so encourage folks to drop in. You'll not only get an opportunity to meet with FEMA representatives there, but you'll also have, county is going to run through its permitting process. You'll have access to partners in the community that can provide educational assistance in terms of what it takes to borrow money from a bank, what it takes to pay those loans back. They have assistance in terms of meeting with local builders, what kind of housing packages they have, and so lots of resources this Saturday, again, at KL High School. We encourage everyone to come out and check it out. There's something for everyone, and there'll be a Keiki Fun Zone, too.
Is the county sponsoring that?
Yes,
And
yeah.
where is it being advertised?
I saw one article in the newspaper, yeah.
Flyer or something somewhere, because we have 600 families that house.
Looking for some.
Maybe broadcast.
Okay, we'll get some out, and we'll do another push. We've got 2 days. And we'll go follow up tomorrow morning on that. Thank you. I'll get you over something, yeah.
Okay, so
I'm still feeling a little disconnected. I found out that the road was being built, and I kind of followed it on Big Island Video News, which was great. And we work on transportation issues in this committee, all the time, right up until the lava flow. I feel like I would be a little more connected to the process if I understood where the money is coming from, or it's not coming from, or it's not in, yet we can still build roads, but how are those roads being built, with what funds? It's the reason being is we're told no a lot in Puna, and yet we have the money to build roads, but we don't have the money to build roads, and it's just a little confusing for me, and maybe I should spend more time, you know, researching and following it, but I don't know how.
So what I would say is that's part of the process, if you will, right? Because part of the process is not just identifying what the issues are, do we understand what needs to be done. Part of it is also figure out what resources can be matched up to what actions, right? Because, and that's the tricky part to recovery. I mean, it's actually the opportunity because we're going to be seeing resources come in that we have not seen before. But the tricky part of it is they come with strings attached, so we have to figure out what can be matched with what, right? And that's where the conversation, so we can have transparency and all of that, so you can the community can understand what resources we have, we don't have, or what strings are attached, right? So we can figure out what's the best way to actually make things happen. And that's where the community comes in also, because you have access, especially to the nonprofit sector, to the philanthropy world, right? The county cannot access those kinds of resources. So how do we match and leverage all those kinds of opportunities? That's what all this process is about. How do we work together and come up with strategies that are fundable and can be financed? I think we heard loud and clear from this group, we don't need another plan that we have no trust that it's going to be implemented or that it's going to take 10 years to actually affect, right? We need to come up with something because the need is now. And that's the nice thing about the recovery process. There's urgency to it. We cannot take 7 years to do this kind of thing. So that was a very roundabout way of answering your question, mostly because I don't have an answer to it.
It has come through our head of public works in a discussion with resolution 732, which was heard at committee level a week or two ago. It's going to be heard again on Tuesday. And that is, they were getting money from federal program, which allows for funding of rural public roads, which 137 is considered a rural feeder road. That source of funding only provides 75%, so we have to come up with a 25% match. Now, the governor did initially give our mayor $12 million. The last I heard, he had only used about half of that for emergency response directly, but it could be higher than that now. And I believe there was an offer on the table of another $7 million. So that may be used for those matches, and we eventually will get back the money from, this is actually the FEMA, that program. That program then does not apply to a more major road like 137, so cannot use that same fund, got to go to a different fund, and that fund actually is better for us to get, we only have to pay 20%. But more hoops to jump through, you know, so they're dealing with all of those hoop jumpings right now. There was an excellent meeting in my office yesterday about recovering access for the 50 or plus homes on the other side of 132. There may be a path forward. Ron Whitmore is working with that group. We have some meetings that need to follow up and questions to be answered. But those are the immediate things that will help to get our community back to a sense of normalcy so we can proceed to the other goals that he's establishing with this PowerPoint presentation. So I hope that helps a little bit.
That really helps. So it sounds like the $12 million that the governor gave us is what just paid for the recent road.
I can't say directly, but may have.
No, I'm seeing no from Diane.
Diane's saying no, so yeah.
That was our,
It's maybe coming from our highway fund. We have increased our highway fund through fuel tax increases, okay?
right,
Our highways fund is up.
but we didn't get that revenue yet.
Yes, we did.
We got the 5 million from the tax increase on property taxes. We got that money already?
Tax. We did a fuel tax.
Oh, okay.
That had a 2-year increase.
Okay.
So we just went up to the highest level, July 1, 23 cents. July 1. And so That's what we're getting in the coffers now. The GE tax for highway fund, which you're referring to, doesn't go into effect until January. You're right. It's not easy.
Yeah, it'd be nice if there were a dashboard. Thank you.
When we talk about having talk story sessions, it could start with a particular issue that folks are really concerned about, and it starts there, but then we also then broaden it out to get information and stories about the broader recovery process. So it could be that way, or people could just come together and talk about the recovery process. In this regard, what Frisha was talking about, so you know that the County of Hawaii launched the Puna Pledge thing with the support of HTA, right? So visitors can go online. They look at all of the different ways to be pono on this Hawaii island as a visitor, and then they make the pledge. So it's a good thing to raise awareness so that it's both a safety issue, but it's also how do you engage with this place and the people of this island. That's very like here, right? So the question becomes really for each community, if you were to engage in the discussion about, well, what does being pono in our place look like for us? And then if we were to welcome people into our place, what does that mean for them to be pono in our place? So you could have like a very place-based kind of pono pledge, and it's not so much just a pledge, but helping visitors understand how to enter our communities in ways that respect us and our place. They come into our homes on our terms, but then we also take up the kuleana of helping them understand what that looks like. And so there could be a whole opportunity here, potentially, but she just wanted to raise sort of the potential opportunity for small group conversations on something like this, but then leads to the recovery process. And what she wanted to point out, really wanted to take this idea of take the wisdom and make it deep. So when HTA talks about having authentic experiences, you know, this could be authentic if we as community can define how visitors should engage with us. And this could be potentially one process that might help that. So she wanted to just kind of lift that up as an example of, you know, a potential kind of engagement that could be part of this process. The other person that was supposed to be here was Micah Almeida from Naleo. And so Micah is currently working with youth to do a couple of things. One is they're doing a commercial for the Merry Monarch Festival to kind of have a youth perspective on it. And then the other thing they're doing is they're lifting up Mo'olelo place, Mo'olelo people that can turn into a mobile app that visitors can use kind of as like self-guided tours kind of thing. What he wants to do is actually make a kahea out to the youth in the Puna community to work with them to basically do this. What is your story? What is the story of your family? What is the story of your community in terms of this experience? And what does that mean for us as a community moving forward in terms of recovery and resilience? And what we hope will happen is that Naleo will work with the youth, they will do the research, they have UH Hilo and cultural practitioners already working with the youth to do the research of the lifting up of Mo'olelo place and Mo'olelo people. And then they have technical experts who will help them turn things into mobile apps or whatever seems appropriate, or even games kind of thing to engage people so that there's both the sharing of the Mo'olelo, but then they can also gather more Mo'olelo. And the hope is that when we have these talk story sessions or we have community meetings, that we have our youth sharing these kinds of things that are important to us. Because we heard that from all of you, and we've also heard it from the community. Where are our youth in these conversations about how do we rebuild? It is their future, so why are they not engaged in this? And so Michael is going to share what he's actually doing versus me trying to figure out what he is doing and trying to make you get all excited about it. But that is something that will be an explicit component of the recovery process, is to engage youth. Naleo will be leading the charge in that regard.
So real quick before we end, I would respectfully add that the Pono Pledge is not only important for our visitors, but it is important for the people who live here, for our residents. And so I would encourage everybody to check it out and pledge. Mahalo. And so lastly, one of the things that Bob talked about, the clearest message that we got, and this is going to tie in nicely when you folks go back to your discussion on monthly meetings. The clear message that we got is these large, very formal type meetings are not the best way to get stories from people. They are not the most comfortable settings for people to feel free to talk about the things that are affecting them, especially when it's something so personal. So when we're able to tell our stories in a safe community, all the things that separate us fade us away, and that's what allows us to see our commonalities, even though we're all different. And so while I understand the want for monthly meetings, I would just add that maybe this is not the only way that we can reach people. And so I would also say on top of that, that Eileen mentioned the GP work. And so I will share, even though the camera's on me, that we are currently an 8-person long-range planning team. So we are doing the GP update. We have 6 CDPs to manage, plus our everyday work and recovery efforts. So I would just ask you to consider that when you're thinking about your motion and your vote. But thank you. And so, oh, sorry, most important part. We're gonna ask if you can stick around. We know it's kind of late, it's almost 7 already. But what we'd like to do, the Action Committee has just 2 more business items that should hopefully go pretty quickly. And what we'd like to do is see if you folks would stick around so that we can do some more talking story. And we have different chart paper around the room, and we'd like to break up into small groups and kind of be able to talk story and get your stories, because we do see new faces. And so it would be a great opportunity for us and for you, hopefully. So we'd ask that you guys stick around and talk story.
Keiko reminded me of another thing that I can share with you, especially some of our newer Action Committee members who weren't here and weren't involved with the development of the community development plan itself. And John, I think, will back me up on this because he was the chairman of the steering committee for the Action Committee. But the foundation that steering committee worked from was the input we got from the community through 130 small group meetings. These were meetings held in people's carports and living rooms and backyards. There might have been 2 or 3 people attending at a time. And that's, I've forgotten how many thousands of input items, but every one of them is still posted online. You can still go look them up. But that served as the foundation for the Action Committee, and it was a steering committee at that time, in the development of the plan. Yeah, we listened to input that we got from people that did attend the large meetings. Our first initial meeting at Kamehameha School, we had, I would say, 150, 200 people show up for that thing. And their input was considered as well. But I think the greatest weight was given to the input we got on those 130 small meetings. Okay, we are gonna heli on back to item 3, having to do with our meeting schedule for 2019. Eric, did we actually have a motion and a second to change it to monthly? We didn't. Okay, I just want to make sure whether we did or not. Yeah, so this agenda item is open again. We don't have any existing motions on this agenda item at this time, right? Right? Okay.
Just been bringing it up about every time we do meet. We haven't met a whole lot this year, and it's been brought up in, during action committee meetings in the past. So, I mean, it's up to you guys.
Okay, you're mentioning it, but if you want us to do something about it, you need to make a motion. This is the meeting schedule that we've been presented with by the planning department. Do we want to approve this, or do we want to make a change to it? Susie?
I just want to provide some sort of potential logical input on this, and I really appreciate all the committees wanting to represent our community, hear the voices, and be an action committee. And Bob, as you mentioned, we did sunset a lot of our bigger projects previously that were on the table prior to the law of the transportation. A lot of those things, as you said, naturally morphed into other people's kuleana, mainly the government. But what I would want to suggest in order to honor both things is that when we get to the stage of the prioritization of goals, as Bob brought forward, after when you get to that stage, then when we understand what the goals are, we could potentially reconvene subcommittees that address the prioritization, and those subcommittees could meet on alternative months. And that way we feel like we are actually making a difference. So I propose we stick with the original schedule and come January, look at those prioritizations and form subcommittees.
Thank you, Susan. Anybody else?
I make a motion that we put this up for a vote, whether we have monthly meetings or not.
So you're proposing we go to a monthly meeting schedule?
Yes.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion further discussion actually, but any more discussion by committee members? Dan?
I feel a whole lot more interested in doing monthly meetings if I had a real better sense that we're actually moving things along and getting somewhere. If doing monthly meetings is what requires, I'm for it. But everything seems to be so very, very sluggish. And of course we have a lot of meetings we didn't have this year. This is the third meeting I've been to, and I've been on the committee since January of last year. And so, of this year. And I just don't feel like we are a force that's moving things along. And it may be that I'm just not reading the tea leaves. But I would be much more interested in monthly meetings if I felt we were a force. So.
Thank you. Brett?
I think that really makes a lot of sense. We've got some possibilities opening up for creating a resiliency framework, and that could require some additional meetings. I'm not sure where that puts us in terms of recovery, and I'm not convinced that there is anything that we can do right now from our committee. Things seem to be happening with or without us, and if that were to continue with monthly meetings, I think that would probably continue with monthly meetings.
I think the takeaway for me from that presentation was that we do have a lot of responsibility to go beyond this formatted meeting. It's not really about having this meeting monthly. I mean, I see the point of us doing other things in those alternate months. We might be pushing all that stuff that's so important that was presented here tonight to the side if we're focused on coming here and doing this very formal kind of setup every time. Like, I think that we really should just stick with this every other month, but we using the time in between to have those less formal meetings that we can bring people to the table that might not show up for this.
And actually, subcommittees are fairly formal, and they are a lot of work, and I think I'm the only one at the table that was here doing those subcommittees with Larry. And so, we will be meeting probably more than every month, but hopefully more effectively. And let's give Bob the chance to get the goal set so we know what it is, the work that we need to do. Because I think right now we would be,
same thing
Yeah,
over
we've
and
heard a
over.
lot of great presentations and
Yeah.
input, but we haven't been doing too much action. But let's understand and be clear about what our action is and then mobilize around that.
You guys, we're volunteers. We all have, most of us have jobs and a lot of responsibilities. We're not being paid to do this, so I don't know who's going to be leading these subcommittees. Any volunteers? No. That's the reality here. And so another reality is that there's a growing concern that Puna has been discriminated against for many years based on Hawaiian ancestry and poverty, and there's a growing movement now for this action. There was a complaint that showed it was a discrimination filed by the Sustainability Committee against the Hawaii Department of Transportation and Hawaii County. I just want you to know that people aren't just going to sit around and wait for the county to move, or even us. It's like lawsuits are starting to come about, just so you know.
Okay, if there's no more discussion, we have a motion on the floor to report back to the planning department that the action committee would like to have monthly meetings instead of bi-monthly meetings. And that was seconded. All in favor of that motion, raise your hand. Opposed? You get the count? Okay. So the motion fails, 1 in favor, and it was 6 against. The last item on our agenda is the election of a chair and a vice chair for the upcoming year. I'll entertain motions or nominations.
Nominate Larry as the chair.
Second.
You're fired. Okay, we have one motion and a second for me to do a 4th year as chair, just in case you lost count. Any other nominations? Okay, I'm going to make one. I'd like to nominate Mark Henshaw.